"Dad, are you really buying that?" Ethan Turner stood beside the rusted shell of the car, with one hand tucked into the pocket of his faded hoodie, the other gripping the strap of his backpack like he might need to run from the embarrassment. Around him, men in work jackets and baseball caps laughed under the pale Montana morning, their breath turning white in the cold air. Jack Turner did not answer right away. He was looking at the car the way some men look at old photographs. The auctioneer slapped the dented hood with the back of his clipboard and grinned at the crowd. "Folks, I'll be honest. I don't know whether we're selling a car or a tetanus shot." A few men laughed harder than they needed to. The car sat at the edge of the county salvage yard, half buried in weeds, its body eaten by rust, its windshield cracked like frozen lightning. One headlight was missing. The other hung loose from the frame. The tires had rotted so badly they looked melted into the gravel. It was not beautiful. Not anymore. Ethan lowered his voice. "Dad, people are looking." Jack glanced down at his son. "They've got eyes," he said softly. That was all. The auctioneer started at $200. No one raised a hand. He dropped to 100. Still nothing. A man from Miller's Auto Repair called out from the back. "You'd have to pay me to haul that thing away." More laughter. Ethan's ears turned red. Jack kept his eyes on the car. He noticed things other people did not bother to see. The angle of the front fenders, the strange curve of the roofline, the hand-shaped aluminum under the decay, the old welds near the firewall, not factory clean, but careful, experimental. Somebody had loved this machine once. Somebody had built it with hands that knew patience. $50, the auctioneer said. "Anybody want to make a bad decision before lunch?" Jack lifted his hand. The laughter stopped for half a second, then came back smaller, sharper. The auctioneer squinted. "Jack Turner, you sure?" Jack nodded. 50. Ethan closed his eyes. The gavel came down. And just like that, the poorest mechanic in Silver Creek bought the ugliest car in Montana. By noon, half the town had heard. By 3 o'clock, someone had posted a photo online. By evening, Ethan had already seen the comments. "Is that Turner's retirement plan? Single dad buys junk instead of groceries. Somebody check on that kid." Jack did not see the posts. He was in the garage behind their small rented house, pulling a tarp over the car while the wind came down from the hills and rattled the loose metal siding. His hands were stiff from the cold. His knuckles were split. There was grease beneath his fingernails that no soap ever fully removed. Inside the house, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his math homework open and untouched. The microwave hummed. A cheap frozen dinner turned slowly behind the cloudy glass. Their dog, Scout, lay near the heater with his chin on his paws. The house smelled faintly of motor oil, old coffee, and laundry detergent. Jack came in through the back door and took off his boots on the mat. Ethan did not look up. "You didn't have to buy it," the boy said. Jack hung his coat on the chair. "No, then why did you?" Jack opened the microwave, burned his thumb on the plastic tray, and set the food down without saying anything. He searched for a fork in the drawer, found 3 spoons and a screwdriver, then closed it again. Ethan finally looked at him. "We're behind on the garage rent. I know, and the truck needs tires. I know. And Mrs. Keller said if I don't pay for the science trip by Friday, I can't go." Jack's face changed then, but only a little. Enough for Ethan to regret saying it. "I know that too," Jack said. The room went quiet except for the heater clicking near the wall. Ethan pushed his homework away. "Then why buy a dead car?" Jack sat across from him. For a moment he looked older than 42. Not dramatically old. Just worn down in the ordinary way men get worn down when life keeps asking for more than they have left. "Because when you saw it," Jack said, "you smiled." Ethan stared at him. The boy's mouth moved, but nothing came out. Jack looked down at the plastic dinner cooling between them. "You haven't done that much lately." Ethan looked away first. The anger in his face did not disappear, but it lost its sharp edge. Later that night, after Ethan went to bed, Jack walked back out to the garage. He turned on the hanging fluorescent light. It flickered twice before staying on. The car waited beneath the tarp. Jack pulled the cover back slowly. In the weak light, the rust looked almost black. He ran one hand along the roof, feeling the dents, the old seams, the places where time had bitten through the paint. Most men saw scrap. Jack saw questions. He opened the driver's door. It groaned so loudly that Scout barked from inside the house. The interior smelled of dust, mouse nests, and old leather. The seats were gone. The dashboard was cracked. Wires hung loose beneath the steering column like at dry vines. Jack leaned in with a flashlight. That was when he saw it. Not a logo, not a serial plate. A small mark stamped deep into the metal beneath the lower dash, nearly hidden behind a corroded bracket. 3 letters, AKX. Then a number 17. Jack frowned. He had worked on Fords, Chevys, Dodges, Studebakers, Packards, and enough farm-built Frankenstein machines to know when something belonged and when it did not. This did not belong. He wiped it with his thumb. The mark stayed, AKX as Susan 7. Jack stood there for a long time holding the flashlight, listening to the wind push against the garage door. Then he took out his phone and snapped a picture. He almost sent it to Frank Miller, almost. Frank had taught him half of what he knew about old cars. Frank ran the biggest repair shop in town, had clean bays, real lifts, customers with money, and a waiting room with coffee that did not taste like burned rubber. Frank had also helped Jack after his wife died, quietly at first, then with the kind of help that began to feel like debt. Jack stared at Frank's name in his contacts. Then he backed out. Instead, he uploaded the photo to a classic car forum with a simple question. Anyone recognize this chassis stamp? He expected 2 or 3 replies. Maybe a joke, maybe silence. At 6:14 the next morning, his phone buzzed so many times it slid off the milk crate beside his bed. Jack woke before the alarm. He picked it up and blinked at the screen. 712 notifications. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Then he opened the forum. Most comments were useless. Fake. Where did you find this? That's not real. Looks like a backyard stamp. Take more photos. Do not sell. Then he saw one comment sitting above the rest, pinned by the moderators. The account had a verified badge. The username was Daniel Brooks Official. Jack stopped breathing for a second. Every American boy who ever cared about racing knew that name. Daniel Brooks. 3-time national champion. The man who had walked away from racing after a crash in 1981 and never gave interviews about it. His comment contained only 9 words. Do not sell this car. I need to know where it is. Jack sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand. Outside, dawn pressed gray light against the curtains. From Ethan's room came the soft sound of a drawer opening, then closing. School morning. Same routine. Same tired silence. Jack read the comment again, then again. In the kitchen, Ethan poured cereal into a chipped bowl and pretended not to care when Jack walked in. You're up early, Jack said. So are you. Jack placed the phone on the table. Ethan looked at the screen. His face changed. Is that? Looks like it. The racing guy? Looks like it. Ethan picked up the phone carefully as if it had become expensive. Why would he care about our car? Jack looked toward the garage. I don't know. For the first time since the auction, Ethan did not look embarrassed. He looked afraid to hope. That was worse. At school that day, the story had already traveled faster than truth. Some kids said Ethan's dad had bought a famous race car. Others said Jack was being scammed. A boy named Mason Keller leaned across the lunch table and said, My dad says your dad probably made the stamp himself. Ethan kept eating. Mason smiled. He also said poor people always think trash is treasure. Ethan's hand tightened around his milk carton. What did you say? Mason shrugged. I said what my dad said. Ethan stood so fast the bench scraped the floor. The cafeteria went quiet around him. For 1 second he wanted to hit Mason so badly his whole body shook. Then he saw the lunch monitor looking over. He sat back down. Mason laughed under his breath. Yeah, that's what I thought. Ethan did not tell Jack about it. Not that afternoon. Not when he got home. Not when Jack asked why his eyes were red. He just changed into his old hoodie and went out to the garage. Jack was already under the car with a flashlight and a wire brush. Hand me the small scraper? Ethan picked it up from the workbench. His fingers brushed against an old coffee mug filled with bolts, the one with World's Okayest Mechanic printed on it. His mom had bought it for Jack years ago as a joke. The handle had been glued back on twice. Jack slid out from beneath the car. There's something strange about the frame, he said. Good strange? Depends who's asking. Ethan crouched beside him. Jack pointed to the underside. See those welds? Ethan squinted. They look messy. They look handmade, Jack said. Not sloppy. Handmade. Like someone was changing things as they went. Is that bad? No, Jack wiped dust from the metal with a rag. It means this wasn't built on an assembly line. Ethan looked at the car differently then. Not as a dead thing. As something interrupted, they worked until sunset. The garage grew cold. Jack's back ached. Ethan's hands turned black with grime, but he did not complain. For 2 hours, neither of them talked about money, school, grief, or the empty chair at the kitchen table, where Ethan's mother used to sit with one knee tucked under her, reading grocery receipts like battle plans. They just worked. For a while, that was enough. At 7:40, headlights washed across the garage door. Jack stood. A black pickup stopped outside. Frank Miller climbed out slowly, wearing his brown leather jacket and the same calm expression he wore at funerals, weddings, and oil changes. Ethan stiffened. Frank was respected in town. That somehow made him harder to face. "Evening," Frank said. Jack wiped his hands on a rag. "Frank." Frank looked past him at the car. He did not laugh. That was the first thing Jack noticed. The second thing was worse. Frank looked worried. "I heard what you bought," Frank said. Everyone heard. Frank stepped into the garage. His eyes moved over the car carefully, but not curiously, like he had seen it before. Ethan noticed too. "You know what it is?" the boy asked. Frank glanced at him. "No." The answer came too fast. Jack folded the rag once, then again. "Then why are you here?" Frank walked around the car, stopping near the driver's side. For a moment, his face softened in a way Jack had never seen. Then it closed again. "I came to give you advice," Frank said. "Sell it if somebody offers real money." Jack watched him. How real? Frank looked at him. "Real enough to save your shop." The sentence landed too close to the truth. Ethan looked at his father. Jack stayed quiet. Frank lowered his voice. "You've got a boy to raise. You've got bills. Don't turn this into some treasure hunt because strangers online got excited." Jack leaned back against the workbench. "You ever seen an AKX stamp before?" Frank's jaw tightened. Only a little, but Jack saw it. "No," Frank said. There it was again. Too fast. Frank turned toward the door. "Be careful, Jack." "With what?" Frank paused beneath the garage light, with believing that every old thing wants to be found. Then he left. The pickup backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. Ethan waited until the taillights were gone. He lied. Jack did not answer. "Dad, I heard him." Why would Mr. Miller lie? Jack looked at the car. The fluorescent light hummed above them. For the first time, the garage did not feel small. It felt watched. That night, Jack did not sleep much. Around 2 a.m., he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, searching old racing archives, abandoned manufacturer records, auction documents, anything tied to AKX. Most results led nowhere. A few led to dead links. One mentioned an experimental program from the late 1970s connected to a designer named Arthur Kane. Jack clicked. The page was old, poorly scanned, half broken. Arthur Kane, brilliant automotive engineer. Designed several championship-winning race platforms. Disappeared from public work after a classified prototype program was canceled. Jack read the sentence again. Classified prototype program. He scrolled lower. There was one photo. Grainy. Black and white. A man in shirt sleeves standing beside the covered outline of a low sports car. The shape beneath the tarp looked familiar enough to make Jack's skin tighten. Then the page crashed. Jack stared at the frozen screen. A sound came from outside. Not loud, just metal shifting. Jack closed the laptop. He stood slowly. The kitchen was dark except for the clock above the stove. 2:17 a.m. He picked up the flashlight from the counter and moved toward the back door. In the hallway, Ethan's bedroom door opened. "Dad?" Jack turned. "Stay inside." "What is it?" "Just stay inside." He stepped out into the cold. The garage door was open, only a foot. Jack knew he had locked it. He crossed the yard quietly, gravel crunching beneath his socks because he had forgotten his boots. His breath came shallow. The flashlight shook once in his hand, then steadied. He lifted the garage door. The car was still there. The tools were still there. Nothing looked stolen. Then he saw the driver's door hanging open. Jack moved closer. The lower dashboard panel had been removed. Cleanly. Whoever had done it knew exactly where to look. The AKX stamp was still there. But something else had been taken. Behind the dash, where Jack had not yet reached, there was a small rectangular cavity. Empty now. Fresh scrape marks showed around the edges. Jack heard Ethan behind him. "I told you to stay inside. I'm sorry." The boy stood barefoot in the grass, face pale in the garage light. Jack wanted to be angry. He could not manage it. Ethan pointed toward the workbench. "Dad," a plain envelope sat beside the old coffee mug. Jack picked it up. No stamp, no address. Inside was a photograph, old, creased, faded around the corners. It showed the car when it was whole, not rusted, not forgotten. Sleek, low silver, beautiful, in a way that made the garage around them feel suddenly unworthy. The car sat inside a concrete tunnel under harsh test lights. 3 men stood beside it. One was Arthur Kane. Jack recognized him from the archive photo. One was younger, wearing a racing suit. Daniel Brooks. The third man stood half behind the open hood, one hand resting on the fender. Jack stared at him. The man had Jack's eyes. Ethan leaned closer. "Dad?" Jack did not move. The cold air pressed against his face. The photograph trembled in his hand. Ethan looked from the picture to his father. "Who is that?" Jack swallowed once, then again. "My father," he said. The word felt strange in his mouth, like something pulled from a room he had locked years ago. Ethan looked back at the photograph. "But I thought—" Jack nodded slowly. "So did I." At the bottom of the photo, someone had written a date in blue ink, October 3, 1979, and beneath it, 4 words. He kept his promise. For the rest of the night, neither Jack nor Ethan slept much. The photograph sat on the kitchen table between them, illuminated by a single yellow lamp that buzzed faintly every few minutes. Outside, the wind dragged dry branches across the siding. Somewhere in town, a freight train sounded its horn, long and lonely against the darkness. Jack must have picked up the photograph 20 times. Every time he stared at the same face, his father's face, the man he had spent most of his life trying not to think about. The man who, according to every story he had ever heard, had abandoned his family. And yet there he was, standing beside Arthur Kane, standing beside a car hidden from history, standing beside something that clearly mattered. Ethan sat opposite him with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. What if Grandpa didn't leave? Jack looked up. The question landed harder than he expected. Your grandmother always believed he did, but what if she was wrong? Jack wanted to answer, wanted to say something certain, something fatherly. Instead, he looked back at the photograph. The handwriting bothered him more than anything. He kept his promise. Not promises, not loyalty, not sacrifice. One promise, specific, personal. Important enough that somebody had written it down. Important enough that somebody had delivered the photograph 40 years later. The kitchen clock ticked. Neither of them spoke again. Not for a while. Morning came gray and cold. The mountains disappeared behind low clouds. By 7 o'clock, Jack was already in the garage. The missing compartment behind the dashboard occupied every thought in his head. Whoever entered the garage had known exactly where to look. That meant one thing. They already knew what the car was, or what they believed it was. He carefully removed more interior panels. Most crumbled apart in his hands. Rust stained his fingertips, dust filled the air. By noon, he had discovered nothing except old wiring and enough mouse nests to fill a trash bag. Frustration settled into his shoulders, the kind that made his neck ache. The kind mechanics knew well. Hours of work, no answers. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Almost. Jack Turner. A woman's voice answered. Professional. Controlled. Mr. Turner, my name is Melissa Grant. I represent the Western Heritage Automotive Collection. Jack recognized the name. One of the largest private automobile collections in America. What can I do for you? We understand you recently acquired a vehicle that may possess historical significance. Jack leaned against the workbench. The phrase sounded rehearsed. Historical significance. Not valuable. Not rare historical. We'd be interested in purchasing it. Without seeing it? A brief pause. Then, we've seen enough. That answer tightened something inside him. How much? Another pause. Then the number arrived. $20,000. Jack almost laughed. Not because it was small. Because for him, it wasn't. $20,000 would solve half his problems immediately. Past due rent, the truck, the science trip, the credit cards, the leaking water heater. All of it. For a moment, he imagined saying yes. Just yes. One word. Life becoming easier. Then he looked at the photograph pinned above his workbench. His father's face stared back, not interested. The woman sounded surprised. Mr. Turner, I don't think you understand. Maybe I don't. Then perhaps you should. Jack ended the call. For several seconds, he simply stood there. The silence afterward felt enormous. Then his phone buzzed again. A text message. Different number, $50,000. Call me. No signature, no explanation. Just that. Jack stared to the screen, then deleted it. The next arrived 5 minutes later. $75,000. Final offer today. He deleted that one, too. By afternoon, 3 more arrived. Different numbers. Different offers. Larger than the last. The last one read, $100,000 cash. No questions asked. The words made him uncomfortable. No questions asked. That was exactly the problem. He had questions. Too many. And nobody seemed interested in answering them. Only buying them. That evening, Ethan returned from school quieter than usual. He dropped his backpack near the stairs and headed straight toward his room. Jack noticed immediately. Parents always do, even when they pretend not to. Hey, Ethan stopped. What happened? Nothing. That's not true. The boy stared at the floor. They were talking about us again. Jack waited. They said we're famous. Jack almost smiled. That's usually not an insult. It was today. The smile disappeared. Ethan shrugged. They said we're trying to scam people. Jack remained silent. They said the car is fake. The words lingered between them, heavy, sharp, meaner because they came from children repeating adults. Jack nodded once. I'm sorry. Ethan looked surprised. You didn't do anything. I bought the car. The boy finally laughed. Just a little. The first real laugh in days. Jack smiled too, only briefly. Then the phone rang again. Unknown number, Jack answered. Hello? The voice on the other end was male. Older. Confident. I'll make this simple. Jack listened. I'll pay $150,000. Jack rubbed his forehead. Who is this? My name isn't important, then neither is your offer. The man chuckled. Not warmly, not kindly. You should think carefully. Jack's patience began to thin. Why? Another pause. Longer this time, then. Because some things are worth more buried. The line disconnected. For several seconds, Jack stared at the phone. A chill moved down his spine. Not fear, exactly. Something colder, the feeling that a game had begun without him, and somebody else already knew the rules. That night, Ethan helped clean more of the interior. The two worked side by side beneath the fluorescent lights. Tools clinked softly. Dust floated through the air. Scout slept beside an old toolbox. For a while it felt normal, comfortably normal. Then Ethan froze. Wait, Jack looked over. What? The boy pointed beneath the rear seat frame. There, Jack crouched beside him. At first he saw nothing. Then he noticed a thin metal edge hidden beneath decades of grime. Not structural, intentional, a panel, hidden. His pulse quickened. Carefully he removed two corroded screws. The panel loosened, then swung open. Inside sat a small leather pouch, dark brown, cracked with age, untouched for decades. Neither spoke. Jack lifted it carefully. The leather felt fragile, almost alive. He opened the flap. Inside rested two objects, a pocket watch and a notebook. The watch was heavy, silver, engraved, the initials A.K. Arthur Kane. But the notebook captured all of Jack's attention. Its pages were yellowed, edges burned, some sections missing entirely, yet the handwriting remained. Precise, elegant, technical sketches filled the margins. Measurements, calculations, ideas, observations, the thoughts of a brilliant engineer frozen in time. Jack slowly turned the first page, then stopped, because written near the top was a name. Not Arthur Kane, not Daniel Brooks, not any racing driver. His father, William Turner. Jack stared. Ethan stared. Neither moved. The notebook trembled slightly in Jack's hands. What does it mean? Jack swallowed. I don't know. But deep down he knew one thing. Everything he thought he understood about his father was beginning to crack. And somewhere beneath those cracks lay a truth. Somebody had spent 40 years trying to hide. The next morning before sunrise, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Jack watched from the kitchen window. The vehicle looked expensive, out of place. The kind usually seen outside law firms or corporate headquarters, not rented houses on the edge of town. A man stepped out, tall, well-dressed, to early 40s, dark overcoat, expensive shoes, controlled posture. The posture of somebody accustomed to winning arguments. He approached the front door calmly, knocked twice, waited. Jack opened it. The stranger's eyes moved immediately past him, toward the garage, toward the car, then back again. I've been looking for that vehicle for 12 years. Jack said nothing. The man extended a business card. Marcus Kane, attorney at law, Chicago. Jack looked up. Kane? The man's expression hardened. My grandfather built that car. The room suddenly felt smaller. Marcus glanced toward the garage again, then met Jack's eyes. I didn't come to buy it. His voice lowered. I came to stop the wrong people from getting it. And for the first time since the auction yard, Jack realized the story was much larger than a forgotten car. Much larger than money. Much larger than his family. Somewhere beyond Montana, beyond the town, beyond the offers and the threats and the lies, there were people who had spent decades searching for what now sat inside his garage. And judging by Marcus Kane's face, they were running out of time. For several seconds after Marcus Kane spoke, nobody moved. The morning sunlight coming through the kitchen window illuminated tiny dust particles drifting between them. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started and then stalled. The ordinary sounds of Silver Creek suddenly felt very far away. Jack looked at the business card again, then at the man standing on his porch. You expect me to believe that? Marcus didn't seem offended. He looked tired, not physically tired, the kind of tiredness people carry after spending years fighting the same battle. You don't know me, Marcus said. That's fair. He reached inside his coat. Jack immediately stiffened. Marcus noticed. Slowly, he removed a folded photograph. Nothing else. He handed it over. Jack unfolded it. The picture had clearly been taken decades earlier. Arthur Kane stood beside a race car prototype. Several engineers surrounded him. One face immediately caught Jack's attention. William Turner, his father, younger, smiling, alive. The exact same photograph from the garage, only wider. More complete. Jack looked up. "Where did you get this?" "My grandmother kept it." Marcus glanced toward the garage. "My grandfather never stopped talking about your father." Jack laughed once. A short, humorless laugh. "That's funny." Marcus waited. "Why?" "Because my father supposedly walked away from everything." The lawyer's expression changed, only slightly, enough to reveal confusion. "That's not what happened." Jack stared at him. A strange pressure began building behind his ribs. The same feeling he remembered from funerals, from hospitals, from moments when life suddenly shifted beneath your feet. "My mother said he left." Marcus slowly shook his head. "No." The word hung in the room. Simple, certain, dangerous. "No, he didn't." Neither man spoke. Then Ethan appeared from the hallway, still wearing yesterday's sweatshirt, still half asleep. "What happened?" Jack looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Ethan. Then at the photograph, and finally back to Jack. "I think it's time someone told you the truth." By noon, they were driving west. Marcus sat in the passenger seat of Jack's aging pickup. Ethan sat in the back. Scout occupied most of the remaining space. The old truck rattled every time it crossed uneven pavement. The heater worked only when it felt like cooperating. Coffee sloshed from a paper cup in the center console. Outside, Montana rolled past in endless stretches of open land and distant mountains. Jack drove. Marcus talked, not continuously, not dramatically, piece by piece. Like someone rebuilding a machine from scattered parts. Arthur Kane, experimental vehicle program, private funding, prototype development, secret testing, corporate disputes, missing documentation, destroyed records, missing prototype, missing people. The deeper Marcus went, the stranger the story became, yet one detail remained constant. William Turner, Jack's father, appeared everywhere. Project engineering records, maintenance reports, test logs, photographs, personal correspondence everywhere. Not as a janitor, not as an assistant, not as a mechanic changing tires. As one of the project's key engineers, Jack struggled to reconcile the image. His father had never been described that way. Not once, not by anyone, not ever. Eventually, Ethan leaned forward. "If Grandpa was important." Marcus looked back. "Very." "Then why doesn't anybody know?" Marcus stared through the windshield. The answer took several seconds. "Because history belongs to whoever gets to tell it." Nobody spoke after that. The truck continued west. Their destination sat outside a small Nevada town, a weathered house surrounded by old cottonwoods. The place looked forgotten. A porch swing creaked gently in the wind. The mailbox leaned sideways. Several rusted engine blocks decorated the yard like strange sculptures. Marcus parked. "We're here." Jack frowned. "This is it?" Marcus nodded. The last living engineer. The front door opened before they reached it. An elderly man stepped outside, 90, maybe older. Thin, sharp eyes, steady posture. The kind of old man who looked impossible to surprise. His gaze landed on Jack immediately. Not Marcus, not Ethan. Jack. The old man's expression softened. For one brief moment, then disappeared. "You look like him." Jack froze. The old engineer nodded once. "More than you realize." His name was Walter Hayes. For nearly 4 hours, they sat around a kitchen table covered with coffee stains older than Ethan. Boxes of photographs emerged, old notebooks. Technical sketches, race reports, letters. History hidden in cardboard. Walter remembered everything. Names, dates, arguments, decisions, failures, victories, the prototype. Arthur Kane, Daniel Brooks, William Turner. Jack listened carefully. The more he heard, the less familiar his own family history became. Then Walter opened a small notebook. Inside was a photograph Jack had never seen before. His father stood beside Arthur Kane. Both laughing. Neither looked important. Just two men enjoying a moment. Walter smiled faintly. They were best friends. Jack blinked. "What? Best friends?" Walter pointed. "Arthur designed things." Then another finger. "William made them work." Jack stared at the photograph. His entire childhood suddenly felt incomplete. Like someone had removed half the pages from a book. Walter carefully turned another page. A newspaper clipping appeared. The headline mentioned an accident during prototype testing. Jack recognized the date. October 1979. The same month written on the photograph. The same month attached to the phrase. He kept his promise. "What happened?" Jack asked. Walter became quiet, very quiet. Outside, wind pushed softly against the windows. Nobody rushed him. Eventually he spoke. "The accident changed everything." His voice sounded smaller now, older. The project ended. Why? Walter hesitated, then shook his head, because powerful people became frightened. Marcus nodded slowly. As if he already knew, Walter continued. Money was involved. Politics, too. The prototype disappeared. The records disappeared. The future disappeared. Jack looked at the old man. What about my father? Walter opened his mouth, then stopped. Something in his expression changed. Concern, confusion, recognition. Not at Jack, at something else, something outside. Everyone turned. A dark sedan sat across the road, engine running, windows tinted, watching. Nobody had heard it arrive. Walter stared through the glass. His face lost color. Marcus stood immediately. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. How long has it been there? Walter never answered. The sedan pulled away, slowly, almost casually, then disappeared around the bend. Nobody spoke for several moments. Finally, Marcus looked at Walter. Do they know? Walter nodded. The room seemed colder. Marcus cursed under his breath. Ethan looked confused. Who? Walter stared at the empty road. The same people who have been looking for that car for 40 years. The drive home felt different. Nobody talked much. Even Ethan remained quiet. The sky darkened early. Rain began shortly after sunset. Headlights reflected off wet pavement. Jack's thoughts never stopped moving. Everything he believed about his father was unraveling. Yet no clear answer appeared. Only more questions. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. Again. Jack almost ignored it. Almost. He answered. A man's voice spoke immediately. Confident. Professional. Calm. I hope your trip was productive. Jack's stomach tightened. He glanced toward Marcus. Marcus immediately noticed. The voice continued. We'd like to save everyone a great deal of trouble. Jack remained silent. $200,000. Rain tapped against the windshield. Who is this? Someone trying to help. Jack laughed softly. The voice remained calm. Think carefully. Then, the car is worth less than you believe. Click. The call ended. Ethan leaned forward. What did they want? Jack stared at the dark highway ahead. The same thing everybody wants. Marcus already knew. The car. Jack nodded. Neither spoke again. Because both men understood something Ethan did not. The offers were increasing, which meant the fear was increasing too. 3 days later, the story exploded. National automotive blogs discovered the photographs. Classic car forums erupted. Videos appeared online. Speculations multiplied. Some claimed the car was priceless. Others claimed it was fake. Some believed it was the lost Arthur Kane prototype. Others called it an elaborate hoax. Then came the interview. The expert. The most respected vehicle authenticator in America. Television crews arrived. Journalists arrived. Half the town arrived. Even people who once laughed at Jack now stood outside the garage pretending they had always believed. The inspection lasted 4 hours. Nobody was allowed inside. Jack paced. Marcus watched silently. Finally, the expert emerged. Cameras surrounded him immediately. Microphones rose. Questions exploded. The expert adjusted his glasses, opened a folder, and delivered a verdict that shattered everything. The vehicle is not authentic. Silence. Then complete silence. Then noise. Questions. Shouting. Movement. The expert continued. The chassis has inconsistencies. The historical claims are unsupported. The prototype identification is invalid. He closed the folder. This vehicle has no significant historical value. The world tilted. Jack barely heard the rest. Ethan's face drained of color. Marcus stared in disbelief. Reporters immediately rushed to broadcast the result. Within an hour, the internet changed direction. Hoax, fraud, mistaken identity, small-town fantasy. By evening, every article carried the same conclusion. Fake. The phone stopped ringing. The offers disappeared. The excitement vanished. Everything vanished. Just like that. The next morning, the bank called. Then the landlord. Then a supplier. Reality returned faster than hope ever arrived. And for the first time since buying the car, Jack began wondering if everyone else had been right. Maybe it really was junk. Maybe he had dragged his son into a fantasy. Maybe he deserved every laugh. That night, the garage felt emptier than ever. The fluorescent light flickered. Scout slept near the workbench. Rain tapped softly against the roof. Jack sat alone beside the rusted car. The photograph lay in his lap. His father's face stared upward, silent, unchanging. A shadow appeared in the doorway. Frank Miller. Neither man spoke immediately. Frank stepped inside, looked at the car, then at Jack. For several seconds, the old mechanic simply stood there, as though wrestling with something. A memory, a decision, a promise. Finally, he spoke, very quietly. I think it's time you learned who your father really was. The rain continued through most of the night. Water tapped against the garage roof in an uneven rhythm. sometimes gentle, sometimes hard enough to drown out thought. The fluorescent light above the workbench flickered every few minutes, filling the room with brief flashes of shadow. Jack remained seated beside the rusted car. He had not moved much since Frank arrived. Neither man had. Scout slept near the heater. The old coffee mug sat on the bench beside scattered bolts and faded photographs. The garage smelled of wet concrete and machine oil. Frank finally pulled a stool closer. His knees cracked as he sat down. For a long moment he stared at the car. Not like a mechanic, not like a businessman, like a man staring at a grave. I should have told you years ago. Jack's eyes remained fixed on the floor. Then, why didn't you? Frank rubbed his palms together. The skin looked rough enough to sandwood. Because your father asked me not to. The answer arrived quietly. No drama, no performance. Yet it landed harder than any shout. Jack looked up. For the first time that night, Frank met his gaze, directly, without hesitation. Your father knew he wasn't coming back. The words hollowed the air between them. Jack felt something tighten deep inside his chest. A pressure he had carried for decades, suddenly shifting position. Not disappearing, moving, changing shape. My mother said he left. Frank nodded. I know. She believed it. I know. Jack stood abruptly. The stool scraped against concrete. Then why didn't anybody tell her? Frank's face aged 10 years in a single second. Because that was the story he wanted her to believe. The garage fell silent again. Even the rain seemed quieter. Jack stared, waiting, trying to decide whether he wanted the rest. Trying to decide whether he could survive it. Frank slowly reached into his jacket. A folded envelope emerged. Yellowed, worn. The paper had clearly been handled many times. Not opened. Handled. Protected. Frank placed it on the workbench. Jack immediately recognized the handwriting. The same handwriting from Arthur Kane's notebook, only older. Less precise, more hurried. My father wrote this? Frank nodded. He left it with me. Jack didn't touch it. Not yet. The envelope felt dangerous, the way truth often does. I kept my promise. The sentence slipped from Frank almost as a whisper. Jack froze. Frank stared at the floor. That's what the photograph meant. Every muscle in Jack's body tightened. You sent the photograph. Frank nodded. You left it in the garage. Another nod. You knew about the car. This time Frank closed his eyes briefly, then answered. Yes. The truth arrived all at once. The mysterious envelope. The anonymous warning. The concern, the lies, the hesitation, everything. All roads led back to Frank. Jack stepped backward. Anger arrived before logic, before understanding, before reason. You watched me struggle. Frank remained seated. You watched people laugh. Silence. You watched banks threaten foreclosure. Silence again. And you said nothings? The old mechanic swallowed. Not defensively. Not guiltily. Sadly. Jack laughed bitterly. No! You didn't. Frank finally looked up. His eyes were wet. The sight shocked Jack more than any confession. Because Frank Miller never cried. Not when businesses failed. Not when friends died. Not even at his wife's funeral. Yet now tears gathered in the corners of his eyes. I wanted to every single day. Jack stopped speaking. Frank continued. Your father made me swear. The old mechanic's voice cracked. Just once. He knew what people were trying to do. Jack listened despite himself. He knew the project would disappear. He knew powerful people would erase records. He knew somebody needed to protect what remained. Frank looked toward the car. And he trusted me. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The rain continued outside, steady, relentless. Frank reached toward the envelope, carefully, almost reverently. Read it. Jack hesitated, then picked it up. The paper felt fragile. The seal broke easily. Inside sat a single handwritten letter, dated October 4th, 1979, the day after the photograph. Jack unfolded it. The first line immediately stole his breath. Frank, if you're reading this, things went wrong. The handwriting belonged to his father. No doubt, no question, no possibility of mistake. Every letter, every stroke, every imperfection. His father's hand, speaking across 40 years. Jack continued reading. I don't know what story they'll tell afterward. Maybe they'll call me irresponsible. Maybe they'll call me foolish. Maybe they'll pretend none of us existed. But if they come looking, protect the prototype. Protect Arthur. Protect the work. And protect my family by keeping them away from this. The words blurred. Jack blinked, forced himself onward. Evelyn deserves a normal life. My son deserves one too. If they think I left, let them. Being hated is safer than being hunted. Jack stopped reading. The garage disappeared. The rain disappeared. Everything disappeared, only that sentence remained. Being hated is safer than being hunted. For years he had hated his father. For years he had believed abandonment, cowardice, selfishness, weakness. Yet the man writing this letter had expected exactly that, had chosen it. Intentionally, not to save himself, to save them. Jack sat heavily on the stool. The paper trembled in his hands. He did not realize he was crying until a tear landed on the page. Frank looked away, giving him privacy. The kind men offer each other without mentioning it. Eventually, Jack spoke. Barely above a whisper. How did he die? Frank closed his eyes. The answer clearly hurt. Officially? Jack nodded. Industrial accident. The old mechanic laughed once. No humor, no joy. Only bitterness. That wasn't the truth. Jack looked up sharply. Frank leaned forward. He was trying to move the prototype. The car seemed larger somehow, more important, more dangerous. He knew people were coming. Who? Frank hesitated, then shook his head. I still don't know. The admission sounded honest, which somehow made it worse. He hid the vehicle. He hid documents. He split evidence into different locations. Frank pointed toward Arthur Kane's notebook. He knew what was at stake. Jack stared at the car. His father had not abandoned them. His father had protected them. And suddenly the grief felt completely different. The wound remained. But the shape had changed. Like discovering an old scar came from saving someone instead of failing them. A noise interrupted the silence. Footsteps. Jack turned. Ethan stood in the doorway. Neither man had heard him enter. The boy had clearly heard enough. His eyes looked red. He wasn't crying. Not close. Very close. Grandpa stayed? Nobody answered immediately. The question felt too important. Finally, Jack nodded. Slowly. Once. Ethan swallowed. Then looked toward the photograph pinned above the workbench. The same photograph that had started everything. He stayed. The boy nodded, as if confirming something to himself. Something he'd needed. Something he'd wanted. Then he quietly crossed the garage, wrapped his arms around his father, and held on. Jack hugged him back immediately, harder than usual, longer than usual. Neither said anything. Neither needed to. Outside, the storm finally began to weaken. 2 days later, another surprise arrived. Marcus Kane returned. This time carrying 3 large archive boxes. He placed them carefully across Jack's workbench. What are those? Marcus opened the first box. Photographs, design records, engineering notes, personal correspondence. Decades of forgotten history. My grandfather's private archive. Jack frowned. You trust me with this? Marcus almost smiled. I trust your father. The answer lingered, unexpected, sincere. Marcus removed a photograph. Daniel Brooks stood beside the prototype. Young, confident, victorious. The future still ahead of him. Marcus turned it over. A handwritten note appeared on the back. Arthur Kane's handwriting. Jack immediately recognized it. Daniel says it's the fastest thing he's ever driven. If it survives testing, everything changes. Nobody spoke, because everybody knew it hadn't survived. History had gone another direction. Then Marcus opened the second box. Inside sat legal documents. Corporate filings, settlement agreements, confidential reports, names, dates, money. A pattern slowly emerged. Companies merged. Projects vanished. Records disappeared. People changed stories. One corporation appeared repeatedly. Different names, different ownership, different executives. Same lineage, the same organization still existed today. Marcus tapped a page. They funded the authenticity inspection. Jack frowned. The expert? Marcus nodded. The garage became silent again. Nobody liked where this thought led. Nobody wanted it. Yet the pieces fit too neatly. The negative ruling, the sudden disappearance of offers, the timing, the pressure, the threats, everything. Marcus looked directly at Jack. We may have a problem. We already have a problem. No. Marcus shook his head. This one is bigger. He removed a final folder. Inside sat a passenger manifest. Private flight records, security logs, schedules. One name highlighted repeatedly. Daniel Brooks. Jack stared. Marcus nodded slowly. I finally found him. The words seemed impossible. For weeks, Daniel Brooks had remained a distant mystery. A comment online. A name in old photographs. A legend. Nothing more. Now suddenly he felt real, reachable, human. Where is he? Marcus smiled faintly. On his way. Nobody spoke. Then Ethan broke the silence. When? Marcus checked his watch. Looked toward the driveway. Then back at them. Probably any minute now. At that exact moment, a deep mechanical sound rolled across the valley. Not thunder. Not traffic. Rotor blades. Everyone turned toward the garage entrance. The sound grew louder, closer. The windows vibrated. Dust drifted from the rafters. Outside, a helicopter descended toward the open field beyond town. Jack's pulse accelerated. Marcus smiled again, this time for real. Because after 40 years of secrets, after decades of lies, after an entire history buried beneath rust and silence, the one man who knew the whole truth had finally arrived. The helicopter landed in a cloud of dust and dry grass. People from neighboring properties stepped onto porches. Several pickup trucks slowed along the county road. In a town as small as Silver Creek, unusual things traveled faster than weather. Jack, Ethan, Marcus, and Frank stood outside the garage watching the aircraft settle into silence. Nobody spoke. The rotor blades gradually slowed. Then the door opened. An elderly man stepped down carefully. He moved slower than the photograph suggested. Age had taken some things, not all of them. Even from a distance, there was a quiet confidence about him. The confidence of someone who had spent an entire life making decisions while traveling faster than fear. Daniel Brooks, the last driver to test the prototype. The man whose comment online had started everything. The racing legend walked across the field toward them. For a moment, his eyes passed over Jack, then Ethan, then Marcus, then Frank. Finally, they stopped on the car. Everything else disappeared from his attention. The rust, the missing paint, the broken glass, the decades of neglect. He saw none of it, or perhaps he saw beyond it. His pace slowed. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody rushed him. Daniel reached the driver's side. His fingertips brushed the roof, then the front fender, then the edge of the windshield frame. His eyes closed briefly, like someone greeting an old friend after a lifetime apart. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded softer than anyone expected. I thought they destroyed her. Silence. Daniel opened his eyes, looked directly at Jack. Where did you find it? A salvage auction? The old driver laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, because fate sometimes is. Arthur would have loved that. Jack felt something shift. Arthur Kane had spent the entire story as a name, a legend, a photograph. For Daniel, he had been a friend, a real person. The difference mattered. Daniel slowly crouched near the front suspension, examined several details, a bracket, a weld, a stamped component. Then he stood. No hesitation, no dramatic pause, just certainty. It's authentic. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Marcus stared. Frank closed his eyes. Ethan looked between faces, searching for confirmation. Daniel nodded. It's the prototype. The words landed quietly, yet somehow louder than every rumor that had preceded them. It's real. News traveled quickly. Truth traveled faster. Within 48 hours, the stories exploded nationwide. Automotive historians revisited old records. Journalists dug through archives. Former employees came forward. Retired executives reluctantly answered questions. Engineers who had spent decades believing the prototype destroyed suddenly found themselves giving interviews. The authenticity report collapsed almost immediately. Evidence surfaced. Financial connections emerged. Documents appeared. The inspection that had declared the vehicle fake had been compromised. Not through elaborate conspiracy. Not through secret agents. Something far more believable. Money, pressure, reputation. The oldest forces in the world. The expert eventually issued a public correction. Then a public apology, then another. But by then, the truth no longer required permission. Too many pieces fit. Too many witnesses existed. Too many records survived. History had finally become stronger than silence. The greatest surprise came a week later. Not from journalists, not from corporations, not from collectors, from a museum. One of the largest automotive museums in America formally requested a meeting. Jack almost declined. By then, he was exhausted. Months seemed to have passed in a matter of days. The meeting took place in Chicago. Marcus arranged it. Daniel attended. So did Ethan. At the center of a long conference table sat a proposal. A large one. A very large one. The museum director explained it carefully. Permanent exhibition rights. Historical restoration funding. Educational licensing. Documentaries access. Research grants. The numbers grew larger with every page. Eventually, Jack stopped reading. Not because he couldn't understand them. Because he could. $22 million. The room remained quiet. The director waited. Marcus waited. Daniel watched with mild curiosity. Even Ethan stopped fidgeting. Jack stared through the window overlooking the city. $22 million. The amount seemed absurd. Enough to solve every problem he had ever known. Enough to solve problems he hadn't even imagined yet. Enough to completely rewrite a life. The director finally spoke. We believe this vehicle belongs in history. Jack nodded slowly. I agree. The director smiled. So you'll sell? Jack looked down at the proposal, then at Ethan, then at the photograph he carried inside his notebook. The one showing his father standing beside Arthur Kane. The photograph that had changed everything. Finally he answered. No, nobody expected that, not even Ethan. The director blinked. I'm sorry? Jack smiled politely. You can display it. Confusion spread around the table. You can study it. More confusion. You can tell its story. Now complete silence. Jack leaned back slightly. But I'm keeping the car. The museum's director looked genuinely stunned. You would decline $22 million? Jack considered the question, then shook his head. No. Everyone listened. I'm declining ownership transfer. The distinction mattered. Daniel smiled first. Marcus smiled second. The museum director eventually understood, and when he did, he smiled too. Because some things become less valuable when sold, not more. 6 months later, spring arrived in Montana. Snow retreated from the hills. The grass returned. The morning smelled different. Cleaner, warmer, hopeful. The garage no longer looked the same. Fresh paint covered the walls. New equipment filled the bays. The leaking roof had finally been repaired. Customers waited outside almost every day. Not because of the prototype, not because of television interviews. Because people trusted Jack Turner. They always had. Now they simply knew why. A new sign hung above the entrance. Turner & Son Restoration. The letters were simple, nothing flashy, nothing expensive. Ethan had helped paint them, twice. The first attempt leaned slightly left. Jack kept the photograph, not in a vault, not behind glass, not inside a museum. It hung above his workbench beside the old coffee mug. Exactly where he could see it, every day. The restoration took almost a year. Thousands of hours, thousands of decisions, thousands of details. Sometimes Daniel visited. Sometimes Marcus visited. Frank visited constantly. The old mechanic seemed lighter now, as if carrying the truth for 40 years had weighed more than anyone realized. One bright autumn morning, the work was finally finished. The prototype sat outside the garage, restored, not over-restored. Not polished into something artificial. It looked alive, the way Arthur Kane had intended, the way William Turner had protected, the way history had almost forgotten. A crowd gathered, friends, neighbors, customers, former critics, children, reporters, people who once laughed, people who once doubted, people who simply wanted to witness the moment. Jack walked toward the driver's door, then stopped. Instead, he handed the keys to Ethan. The teenager stared. What? Jack smiled. You found the notebook. Ethan laughed nervously. Dad, you found the compartment. Dad, you believed when I didn't. The crowd watched quietly. Jack pressed the keys into his son's hand. I think you've earned the first ride. For several seconds, Ethan simply stood there, speechless. Then he opened the door, sat inside, and smiled. The same smile Jack had noticed at the auction months earlier. The smile that had started everything. Only this time it wasn't brief, or uncertain, or hidden. It stayed. Jack climbed into the passenger seat. The engine started. A deep mechanical sound rolled across the valley. Not loud, not aggressive, confident, alive. People applauded. Some cheered. Frank wiped his eyes discreetly. Marcus looked away for a moment. Daniel simply nodded. The prototype eased forward. Past the garage, past the crowd, past the old life. The road stretched toward distant mountains glowing beneath afternoon sunlight. For a while, neither Jack nor Ethan spoke. The car hummed steadily beneath them. Wind moved through the open windows. The world felt larger somehow. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. Dad? Jack looked over. Yeah? The teenager kept his eyes on the road. Do you think Grandpa would be proud? Jack watched the mountains, the sky, the sunlight flashing across the hood. Then he thought about a man who had accepted being misunderstood so his family could remain safe. A man whose greatest act of love had looked like abandonment. A man history nearly erased. A man finally remembered. Jack smiled, not happily, something deeper, something earned. Yeah, his voice was quiet, but certain. I think he would. The road continued west. The mountains were ahead. And for the first time in a very long time, the Turner family wasn't driving away from the past. They were carrying it with them, the right way, the way it had always deserved.